when my mother said, "No one will even remember your wedding." For the first time in 27 years, I felt something inside me crack, quietly, but finally. I stood in the empty lobby of the banquet hall where we had just confirmed the menu, flowers, and music, while a thick evening snow drifted down outside. The air smelled of wet cold and warmed asphalt, and it seemed to sprinkle something icy over me. My phone buzzed in my hand. Her message flickered on the screen, and I wanted to howl, but a wire of heat tightened in my throat. "No worries," I whispered to myself, because that's what you say when your heart has already numbed. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked to the window of my small city apartment and listened to the rain. The sound in Seattle had always been a static hum against the glass, soft, endless, familiar. That morning, after my father's text and my mother's voice, I realized the silence in our family was not peace. It was exile dressed up as manners. My name is Elise, 27, the youngest of three. My parents have always loved appearances more than people. My mother arranges every holiday table as if for a magazine. My father runs a logistics firm and likes to sound like the center of the world. I have worked since my teens, paid my way, never asked for help. When I got a scholarship, my father said, "That's nice, but stay close like your sister." When I sold my first small business, he texted, "Proud of you, honey," and that was it. A quiet pat across 1,000 miles. I read my mother's message and saw the stack of closing papers pinned on my board. White Oak Studio, a small creative loft I'd finally bought. My name on the deed. I held the phone, typed "no worries," and pressed send. Then I leaned back and whispered to the empty room, "This year I'm setting my own table." The drizzled drawing tracks down the glass felt like the foldable table at home that was always wobbly and dismissed as temporary. For decades, I had been the one to fill the silence, the one carrying trays, setting out plates, taking up the small space at the edge of family photos. Always moving, never seated. When I called my brother to ask about Thanksgiving, his pause told me everything. "They're keeping it small," he said. "Just family, Marissa's friends." Simple had always meant without you. That morning, the silence didn't sting. It challenged me. If their table was full, I'd set mine. If their manners were polite, I'd make kindness loud. Thanksgiving wasn't about who invited me anymore. It was about who I decided to feed. The plan began with small, adult steps rather than dramatic gestures. The day after the wedding, the air in our apartment still smelled faintly of flowers and cake, but I woke up with a strange clarity. I wrote in my notebook, "Return to myself, set boundaries, stop fearing their disappointment." Boundaries had never existed in our home. Now I drew them with I left for a week to a small coastal town where I knew no one. The sea was a salve. I walked along the pier for hours, listened to waves hit the rocks, watched gulls cut the sky. For the first time in years, I paid attention to myself. Not duty, not the supposed tos, but to my own breath and wants. The space inside me that had been clenched for decades began to soften like thawing ice. When my mother called and left messages accusing me of ingratitude and running away, I didn't pick up. For the first time, their insistence to control me made me smile. Their version of help had always been control. My quiet revenge was to stand up. I returned and set to work on the studio I had delayed for so long, a place for workshops, small exhibitions, conversations. A derelict photo lab with high windows and raw walls became my field of action. I chose warm oak, soft graphite, and light plaster. Hiring a small crew, choosing fixtures, ordering fabrics, it all felt like constructing a body for my life that others had no right to command. Volunteers arrived. A retired caterer with a stash of pie crusts, a nursing student bringing supplies, truckers bringing wood and vegetables. The space filled with the hum of people who were there to help without a ledger of judgment. For the first time, the noise around me didn't hurt. The world was making room for the parts of me that had been told to stay small. When the studio's lights were turned on for the first time, we stood in the glow, me, the designer, the builder, and something inside me stung with tears. Not because it was pretty, but because I had built it myself, without permission or approval. That warmth pooled and stayed. Then my parents arrived unexpectedly at the opening, the shadow at the doorway. My mother's gaze hunted for flaws. My father's posture asked for apologies I would not offer. "Playing adult?" she asked with thin politeness. I stepped forward. "This isn't a game," I said. "This is my life." They left with the same silence they had always relied on, the silence of those who withhold care as punishment. But the quiet in me wasn't the old emptiness. It was a new space. Their loss was that they could no longer hurt me with the words and silences that once held me captive. I toasted the new life and the wound that finally stopped bleeding. Freedom, it turned out, was quieter and fiercer than I could have imagined. Carl quietly closed the door behind him when he left for work in the morning, and I stayed in the apartment where it now smelled of paint, coffee, and something new, barely noticeable freedom. It wasn't sharp or loud. It was soft, like early morning light slowly filling a room without asking permission. I woke up before the alarm and no longer rushed between obligations and guilt. I knew that today I would either meet with a contractor, buy materials, or go to the studio again to check how the walls were drying after the second coat. In this routine, seemingly ordinary, there was something uplifting. For the first time, every step I took belonged to me. I remember the moment the studio lights were turned on for the first time. The three of us stood there, me, the designer, and the construction worker. The space was still raw, smelling of cement dust and fresh wood. Coils of wire lay on the floor and boxes of lamps stood against the walls. But when the soft, warm light flickered to life around us, my eyes stung. Not because it was beautiful, but because I had done this myself, without permission, without approval, without fear that someone would say, "You've gone too far." I wasn't overreaching, I was growing. That evening I walked home. It was December, cold but clear. Snow crackled under my boots, a small cloud of vapor escaped with every breath, and for once my mind was quiet. No voices from the past, just me, the road, and anticipation for tomorrow, another step forward. But it's exactly in these moments that the past returns. It hates when you stop carrying it like a heavy backpack. When I approached my building, my parents were standing in the shadow of the entrance. They hadn't called, hadn't texted, just waited. My mother in a long gray coat, clutching her bag. My father, hands in pockets, gaze stern as if I were late to a hearing. A cold wave hit the back of my neck harder than the winter air. "Where have you been?" my mother asked, as if I were a schoolgirl skipping classes. "At work," I answered evenly. "What work?" My father stepped closer. "We came to talk. Can't you pause for once and give your family some time?" Family. They remembered we were a family only when they needed something. A sting hit under my ribs, but I inhaled deeply. "I'm busy. If you want to talk, we can do it tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" My mother's eyebrows shot up. "That's your gratitude. We came across the whole city. Do you even realize how much you've changed since that wedding?" She said wedding the way one might say accident or disease. "Yes," I said calmly. "I do." She faltered, not expecting such directness. "What's happening to you?" she asked more quietly. "We feel you drifting away. You're acting strange, wrong." There it was. Wrong, their favorite word. "I'm acting the way that feels comfortable to me," I said. "The way I've wanted for a long time." "And you don't even think you need to discuss your decisions with us?" my father asked, still stepping forward, full of the authority he no longer had. "They're my decisions," I replied. "My life." My mother frowned, lips pressed tight as if holding back a phrase she couldn't contain. Then she let it slip. "If you're planning to refuse our help," I laughed softly, tired, liberated. "What help?" I asked. "Show me one moment when you were there for me, when you supported me, when you said you believed in me, just one." My mother opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "You came to my wedding to mock my choice, to belittle me, to feel superior. That isn't help, It's control disguised as care. You're ungrateful, my father muttered. No, I said calmly. I'm just no longer convenient. And in that moment, for the first time, I saw fear in their eyes, not for me, for themselves, for losing control. They left quickly, as if afraid I'd say more. The door closed behind them, and I stood alone. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt relieved. Quietly, deeply, unmistakably relieved, as if someone had finally lifted a heavy armor that had been crushing my shoulders for years. I went upstairs, made tea, sat on the windowsill, and for the first time allowed myself to say out loud, I don't belong to them anymore. That thought, spoken without fear, became the beginning of the revenge I had lived 27 years for. Not revenge that destroys, but revenge that builds. Days passed, and my studio grew with me. I laid out fabric samples, chose lamps, arranged flowers in ceramic vases I'd bought at a market from an old woman. I felt like the owner not only of a space, but of my entire life. The first booking requests came from people who wanted to rent the space for events. I drafted schedules, trying to make everyone who entered feel the warmth I'd craved all my life. One day, a girl approached me, fragile, with watercolor eyes. I've wanted to start teaching my classes for a long time, she said, glancing around nervously. But I was always afraid. When I saw how you work, I felt calmer. Can I try? And I understood. My strength was spreading, like a candle lighting another candle. I supported her, listened, helped her choose a time slot, and suddenly realized I was becoming the person I once needed. The adult who says not, you want too much, but you can do this. But the past came back once more, sharp and painful. It happened on the day of the studio's opening. There were many people, friends, colleagues, acquaintances. Carl held my hand. We laughed. Music played. The room smelled of fresh pastries I'd set on the table. Then the door opened. My mother. My father, standing there like a shadow, uninvited. My mother looked around the room, and in her gaze I read everything I had known since childhood. Dissatisfaction, superiority, the need to find a flaw. So, she said as she walked closer, you decided to play an adult. Carl gently squeezed my hand. I stepped forward. This isn't a game, Mom, I said. This is my life. Her lips twisted as though the taste were bitter. You've changed a lot, she said. I became myself. We believe you're behaving incorrectly, my father added. And I believe I'm finally being honest. We stood in the middle of my bright, warm space, and everything I had wanted to tell them my entire life finally rose to the surface. You weren't there when I fell. You didn't celebrate when I rose. You didn't support me when I chose my path. You love only the version of me you can control, the version that is quiet, obedient, convenient. But that version is gone. They stayed silent, and for the first time I enjoyed that silence, because it was no longer my weakness. It was their defeat. I'm not asking for your approval, I said, and I never will again. If you want to be part of my life, you can, but only as guests, not owners. My mother turned away, her eyes glistened. I thought I saw a hint of regret, or fear, or emptiness. They left without another word, and I stood in my studio, filled with light, and felt my wings unfold. Not loudly, not dramatically, but maturely, like a flower blooming in the dark when no one is watching. In that moment, I realized my revenge was complete. Not because I hurt them, but because they could no longer hurt me. I returned to the guests, smiled, poured myself a glass of champagne, and whispered, to a new life, and maybe to a healed wound that no longer bled. Because now I had the most important thing, the freedom to be myself.